turns on us. We're keeping our fingers crossed that we can get through this pretty quickly. We do have a panel here of professionals that have come together to answer questions for the community, and we want this to be an open dialogue for everyone here. Ask questions. We'll try to educate you the best that we can. And there is a microphone in the back if it's easier. If you could go up and ask your question on the microphone. And then each of the panelists will go ahead and introduce themselves. We'll do that now. And then we'll start off with a PowerPoint. And throughout the PowerPoint, it's okay to ask questions, and we can go off some of the slides that we have here. There you go.
Good evening. Hello. Hi, my name is John Caceres. I run the marketing communications near 100-bed substance use disorder facility, inpatient in Bradford, and with a satellite location in Virginia.
Hi, I'm Cindy Boyd. I'm the Executive Director of the Kingdom Recovery Center here in St. Johnsbury, and we're one of the 12 peer recovery support centers throughout the state of Vermont.
Good evening. My name is Tennyson Marceau, and I'm from Vermont Regional Hospital Prevention Services.
Lynn Bushy, District Manager, Probation and Parole. I've been with Probation and Parole since 1998, and I am a resident of St. Johnsbury.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Smith. I'm one of the supervisors down at the Department for Children and Families, the Family Services Division.
I am Kevin Black. I'm the resident agent in charge of DEA's office in Vermont.
I'm Sean McGraw. I'm with the Homeland Security Investigations up in Derby Line, Vermont.
Tim Page, St. Johnsbury Police Chief.
Hi, I'm Jessica Zaleski. I'm the interim Caledonia County State's Attorney.
I'm Jen Barrett. I'm the elected State's Attorney in Orleans County.
Good evening. Christina Nolan. I'm the U.S. Attorney for Vermont.
Good evening. John Opart. I'm the Deputy Criminal Chief of the United States Attorney's Office.
All right, we'll try to turn it up, the volume up a little bit. And I'm Teresa Randall. I'm a lieutenant with the Vermont State Police, and I'm the commander of the Vermont Drug Task Force. I've worked in the task force since 2008. I started my career as an undercover drug detective. Then I supervised our drug unit for about 3 years, and now I'm the lieutenant of the Northern Drug Task Force. So I cover the whole northern half of the state. So we're going to talk about today the opioid crisis and also illegal drugs in our community. And all of us, I think, have been touched in one way or another by the evil of addiction, whether it's someone that we know, a family member, a friend, a school classmate. We all have it, and it's here in our community. So we want to educate you tonight and have an open dialogue and try to come up with some solutions on how we can help this problem that we have. And I apologize, I don't have a clicker, so I'm going to have to keep moving my PowerPoint here. So the problem, we did recognize the problem when Governor Shumlin was in the governor of Vermont back in 2004. When we decided that opiate crisis was a big problem here in Vermont. We started out back in, I would say probably 2009, 2010, when I was buying oxycodones, Oxycontin up in St. Albans area for $150 a pill. We knew that that was going to have to change, that there was going to be something coming up the pike that was going to be cheaper. So that's when heroin started hitting our streets, and then the heroin is now, we're seeing, also laced with fentanyl. Oops. Apologize for this. So the media started to portray the opiate crisis in Vermont This certainly isn't the kind of image that we want for our state, and I'm sure that all of you would agree. Rolling Stones, back in April of 2014, featured a story on Vermont and our maple syrup, state of Vermont, pure heroin. Also, the National Geographic featured a story, and Vermont was the most drug-infested state. So this is what we're living with, and this is the image that we want to get away from. It is the opioid problem as bad as the media portrays. Since 2000, there has been an 8-fold increase in the seeking treatment for opioid use in Vermont. Nationwide, more than 6 out of 10 overdoses involved opioids. So what is an opioid? And this is some examples up here on the screen. You're going to see the top is a powder, and that's either powdered heroin or it could be fentanyl. Also the pill form, and generally it's a class of drugs including illegal drugs, heroin, fentanyl, powder, pain prescriptions, hydrocodone, and they're chemically related, and they react to the opioid receptors or nerve cells in the body and the brain. Typically, heroin is a white or brown powder, and it's very fine. And when I talk about the consistency of heroin or fentanyl, it's almost like a baby powder. It's really can be like a fine powder. Common methods of use is either snorted, injected, or smoked. And some of the effects, suppression of pain, there's a feeling of a rush, depressed respiratory rate, a clouded mental, and vomiting, nausea, and overdose, which is something, overdoses are something that we're seeing here in Vermont and we're seeing here in this community. Some of the physical indicators are use of opioids. What you're going to see are pinpointed pupils, track marks. We call it people going on the nod. They're nodding off, falling asleep, low blood pressure, slow breathing, slow reflexes, and slurred speech. These are some pictures of some track marks on people. And the young lady, which would be your, if you're looking at it on the left, she was someone that I've known for a long time, and those are probably some of the worst track marks I had seen on someone. And she was being arrested in a drug operation, and she said, "Teresa, you've known me my whole entire life. Please don't do this to me." And I said, "We need to get you help. This is the time that you need to get help." So, you know, these are the things that we see people in marks on their hands, on their arms, different places, and people, they'll shoot up anywhere on their bodies. Some of the indicators, and as community members, families, these are things that you need to watch for, things that are out there as signs of someone that may be using. So needles, a spoon, lighter, water, cotton balls, the small rubber bands, packaging, tissues with clotted blood spots, and Narcan. I actually have one of our Narcans that we carry. These are what saves lives if someone were to overdose from an opiate. And my detectives and all the law enforcement in the Vermont State Police carry these. So not only if they respond to someone who has an overdose, but also if one of the officers is exposed, we'll have this Narcan, especially when we go into these bigger drug houses where there's a lot of heroin and opiates out there. This is what some of the packaging looks like. They have the small waxing bags, and the smaller, sometimes they're in the plastic bags as well. A lot of the drug trafficking organizations, they will stamp their packages, their bags of heroin in different colors and different markings. A lot of times that's how a drug user identifies what's hot on the street. If somebody overdoses on a particular brand, they're called, or a marking, a lot of times they'll go back out and seek that particular stamp again. So it's kind of a double-edged sword for us. Do we want to tell the community and the users out there, you know, the Pink Panthers are hot, people are overdosing, there have been a couple overdose deaths, because that makes them want to go out, the users want to go out and get that particular drug. We had a guy up in the Orleans County area overdosed on a particular brand or marking of heroin on a Thursday. He got Narcan brought back, went to the ER, and then went back out that Saturday, found the same bag, went out looking for it, overdosed again, and had to be Narcan and brought back to the ER. So 3 out of 4 people who use heroin in the past year misused opioids first. So it could be a prescription drug. And then 1 out of the 4 are receiving long-term opioid treatments in primary care to help with the opiate addiction. Oops, sorry. The prescription pills, like I said, back a couple of years ago, when we were out buying what started the whole opioid crisis, is what we believe, when we were buying Oxy 80s, and they were about $80 for an 80, $1 per milligram. And then the price went up to about $150 per pill in different areas. Heroin, the cost for a bag is about $15. A lot of our users will trip to Massachusetts because they can buy it for $2 a bag. So the switch came back when the oxys were really expensive. Heroin was starting to hit the streets. And then fentanyl, now we're seeing a lot of fentanyl. We're seeing our heroin laced with fentanyl. There's also been reports of fentanyl in cocaine. And it's 30 to 50 times more potent than heroin. When we talk about overdoses in our community and the rates in Orleans and Caledonia County, when I get the reports from our usually from our intelligence center, when I see 3 overdose cases, whether it's a fatal or just an overdose, if I have 3 in Caledonia County or 3 in Orleans County, I go on alert. That strikes a nerve with me, because you know that there's a batch out there, what we call a hot batch. And when we see these hot batches come in, if I have 3 overdose in Chittenden County, population is a lot greater. A 3 overdose in a small community like this really sets the alarms off. These are the heat maps that we use. These are 2017, 2018 heat maps. And I look at that, we get these from our Intel department or unit. And looking at, obviously you can see Chittenden County is really hot down in Brattleboro. Rutland County is hot. But we also have over to the right in 2018, and even in 2017, you can see where Orleans and Caledonia County have had some hot spots for overdoses. And these are EMS calls for law enforcement back in 2018. And keep in mind, when we report these numbers, these are overdoses that are reported. What we're finding are users will have their own Narcan, and they'll say to their buddy, here's my Narcan, I'm gonna shoot up. If I go down, you hit me with a Narcan, and I'll do the same for you. And those are the overdoses that are not being reported to us, so those numbers are not captured when we start looking at how many overdoses we have on a monthly or weekly basis. The flow of drugs into Vermont. Vermont is not a source state. So every drug that comes into our state is being consumed by a user. What we have in 2000, all the way back, I think from the beginning of time since I've been in the drug unit, our source cities are, we consider New York the source state, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and also New Jersey. That's where the drugs are flowing up. Very easy on the 91 corridor coming up from Massachusetts. The drugs are coming up to Vermont by bus, by train, rental car, community members here, driving down, picking people up, bringing them back up with their loads. So some of the, if you can look, the top line is substance abuse, but this is DCF, and in 2015, 51% of the children under the age of 6 were in DCF custody due to opioids. And I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, if you have any other numbers from DCF and what you're seeing in that.
So what we found is, with the opioid and drug issues that have been happening, is that our reporting has increased, which has also increased the amount of children under the age of 6 who have come into care. We've also experienced much higher caseloads, and which also creates staffing issues. So, I mean, obviously we're impacted by the drug issues, as well as I believe everybody in the community is also touched in some way by the drug issues, whether it's school staff or law enforcement, probation, everybody, families especially.
Thank you. So prescription, opioid prescriptions, we are seeing that there is a decline in that. And I think the medical field has done a really good job since we've recognized the problem and possibly the stemming root of our problem, which were the oxys and the pills. Doctors are doing a much better job on controlling their prescriptions. And what is law enforcement doing? And I'll talk about Vermont State Police and the Vermont Drug Task Force, but I'm also going to hear from, we'll let the chief of St. Johnsbury talk about what he's doing, DEA as well. They'll talk about what they're doing in the community, and all of us obviously working together has been very effective as well. And probation and parole, we'll talk about, give them a chance to explain to you everything that they're doing there. So obviously we're working to disrupt the supply of heroin and other drugs. We, with the Vermont Drug Task Force, we received a couple of grants. We actually get a couple of grants every year, the JAG grant, and then we also have an anti-heroin task force grant. And with that, we've been able to expand the task force with detectives as well as resources, so equipment. It helps us buy equipment. It gives us money so that we can go out and we actually do drug buys with the money. We have a drug analyst now who just focuses on drugs, and they do all the heat maps for us and collect all the overdose data and any other type of information that we need for intel. There's also a drug monitoring initiative, and it's bringing partners together. They're tracking the seizure data, as well as they're educating and for law enforcement, EMS, treatment, and prevention. So, Lynn, do you want to talk about what you guys are doing there?
Sure. So at probation and parole or corrections overall, offenders who enter the facilities are receiving a maintenance medically assisted treatment. It has to be prescribed by a doctor. And when they leave the facility, they're also given Narcan should they want that. The field is trained in dispensing of Narcan. Our staff carry Narcan, and we also give out Narcan bags for those who want them. We also work very closely with law enforcement, passing on any information that we feel is relevant. We have seen a lot of overdoses, and we've seen a lot of fentanyl use. I keep track because fentanyl is dangerous to not just those who are using, but also any kind of contact that someone may have. Officers overdose. We haven't had that, but I'm sure law enforcement can speak to that. We refer to treatment, case planning. We communicate with BART, Recovery Center, Valley Vista. So it's really about case planning and keeping referring. I don't think that incarceration is the answer for somebody who's addicted. That's different from somebody, I think, who's selling to those that are addicted. But it doesn't mean that they don't get timeouts either. And it's that constant referral, constant case planning, and hoping that something makes a difference.
Yeah, if you want to go ahead and have anything to add to that, or what you guys see on the federal side, the two of you.
Sure. I mean, one thing that I think is worth talking about is that we've seen a reduction so far this year in overdose deaths in Vermont. We've seen about a 10 to 15% reduction so far this year. So we're definitely heading in the right direction. I think much of that, if not all of that, is attributed to the reduction in prescriptions. Prescriptions are way, way down this year. So, but at DEA, we continue to focus on our law enforcement partnerships and improving them. All of our agents carry naloxone all the time. So there are a lot of things after years and years of enduring this opioid crisis. You know, we're learning what works and what doesn't, and we're leaning into the things that work here in Vermont, and we're seeing progress. So there's a lot of things to be encouraged about. We try to see the silver lining when we can. So, but we're heading in the right direction this year, and we're going to continue to build upon our progress.
Thanks. So I'll go back to when I started to work with the federal government back in 1987. And it wasn't long after that I was raiding crack houses in Detroit. And I was astounded by the deprivation of what was going on there. I remember going into crack houses looking for someone we had a warrant for and finding babies home alone. And as a young man, that made a big impact on me. And I continued on throughout my career. I ended up down on the southern border in El Paso, Texas. When I got down there in 1991, I could not believe how wide open the border was. And we had more drug cases than we could handle back in the early 90s. So I did this for about 9 years. And we would see primarily marijuana. And it was flowing over in huge loads, small loads, any way they could cross it. And I could never have imagined that we would have gone from the marijuana situation to what we see now. States are legalizing marijuana, and we are reporting primarily huge loads of cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl that are, again, pouring through the southwest border. I lead a small group of agents up here on the northern border, and we're sending guys down to help on the southern border. I've got one of my guys down there now. So it continues to be a big problem. That's where the drugs are coming in. It's not just an American problem, although we are the #1 consumer, and I've worked overseas. Every country has drug problems. I've worked in countries that they don't allow alcohol, and they have drug problems. So this is something that we cannot arrest our way out of. We cannot investigate our way out of this. And the good sign is that we have people here in the community that care and that come out tonight. And the police, the law enforcement guys to my right and left here, we can't do our jobs without you guys being engaged and to work with us, because there's only so much we can do. We need the eyes and ears of the public to cooperate with law enforcement, and that's the critical piece that we are looking for in the state and all the way across the nation. We can only hope that we can come up with a solution and focus on it and attack it. But together, we're going to need you guys to be successful.
I've been the chief here in St. Johnsbury for about 2 years now, and I got here and things were a little bit of a mess in regards to the opioid crisis. So I want you to know that the guys and girls in my department are some hardworking guys and girls. We get calls all the time about problem areas, problem buildings. People know that drugs are being sold there. We know that drugs are being sold there. And I know they get frustrated when they see the same thing occurring time and time and time again. There's a system, and we have to follow it. Oh, I'm sorry. And we have to follow it. So it takes time, and I have to ask for your patience in that regard. But the fallout from the opioid crisis with children's and families, with overdoses, with fatalities as a result of the overdoses. We go to every one of those things, and on most occasions I have 2 guys working a shift. So it was not unusual for us to go to an overdose, give Narcan, later in the day, go back to the same person and give Narcan again. My guys carry 2-3 packs of Narcan on them because sometimes it takes two uses to get the person out of the overdose. So it's a huge cost to the community. EMS is responding, fire department's responding, we respond, and it's a vicious cycle. So on top of all of that, my guys are kind of the boots on the ground, and when I say guys, I mean my guys and girls. They're kind of the boots on the ground, and they are developing the information. And we get people like probation parole calling me. My guys talk to people on the streets. They talk to the drug dealers. They talk to the drug users. They talk to the regular citizens that call in. And we take all that information and we do use it. It is helpful. So we do need those calls. We, in turn, funnel information to the Drug Task Force, who can use it for confidential informants, use it to target places that are a particular problem. So I want you to know that we are working hard, and we know about the drug problem out there, and we are working hard to do something about it. I was extremely glad that all of these ladies and gentlemen came here and helped us out in the recent surge. I was asking profusely for it because we were having a few problems. So, and I've been told we're going to keep doing that, and that's a good thing for us. So we only have so much we can do here. And with the help of the federal partners and state partners, we can get a lot more accomplished. So With that in mind, if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to take them about the police department. Okay, I'll give you the state's attorney.
Good evening. So my office's role in all of this is to support local law enforcement, actually support all law enforcement, whether it's our local law enforcement, our state law enforcement, or our federal law enforcement, particularly when we have these very directed efforts like we had recently with the surge. It was an amazing coming together of multiple agencies to really do something that really just can't happen unless we all work together. And then what happens, my office's role is then to support those investigations. When the cases come to us, we assess them for charging. And really, we take a look at, we try to really take a look at what's going on with individual defendants and take them on a case-by-case basis, keeping in mind that really our #1 priority is public safety and to do what we can to keep this community safe. And I would just echo what Chief Page said, which is we really can't do this without you. We need the intel from the community. We need to know what's going on. We need to know how we can help. And you all need to know that our doors are open, our phones are open. Call, talk to us, let us know what's going on, because we are here to listen and support.
So again, I'm Jen Barrett. I'm the state's attorney up in Orleans County, and over the last several years since I took office, what we're seeing are a lot of changes that are concerning for the kingdom, and one of them is we're seeing an increased number of people who are coming in from out of state and setting up shop and selling drugs to the people within our community. So when we work with the task force and we work with our federal partners, we're trying to target the people who are selling for profit and for people who are coming in just to sell within our community. One of the other things that we're seeing in prosecuting that's particularly alarming is there's an increased level of violence that comes with the drug dealing trade in our community. And so we are seeing kidnappings, we're seeing attempted murder cases, we're seeing homicides that are all related to drugs. And so it's really important. We know that we cannot arrest our way out of addiction and that that is not the solution, but we need to do our part and make sure that the violence in our community is not increasing. And so I echo what my partners are saying. There are ways to provide anonymous information. There are ways to provide us with intel. We want it. We are all working on it actively, and we hope that you reach out to us.
Okay, hello again, everybody. I'm Christina Nolan. I'm the U.S. Attorney for Vermont. Now, my job, because it can be a little confusing with all the different prosecutors. You've got T.J. Donovan, the Vermont Attorney General. You've got the state's attorneys. But my job is to oversee the U.S. Attorney's Office and our prosecutions under federal law. There is a lot of overlap between federal law and state law when it comes to crimes. And pretty much, not always, but pretty much any drug trafficking offense can be prosecuted in federal court or state court. And that's why my partnerships with the state's attorneys are so important, so that we can figure out on a case-by-case basis where these cases should be brought. Our primary role at the U.S. Attorney's Office is to hold people accountable and bring charges and seek justice when people are selling drugs for profit. Sometimes those individuals are addicted individuals, sometimes they are not, but they are selling for profit. It's not a crime to be addicted, but when your addiction or some other motivation causes you to sell to others for profit, that is going to be a crime that we're going to look at state or federally. That doesn't mean you go to jail forever, okay? We have to try to do justice in each case, and sometimes we're looking for a non-incarcerative sentence that could get an individual with very minimal record into treatment. But let me not digress too much. I was proud to stand up here with many of the people you see sitting at the table, when was it? Last week, and announced 16 charges against individuals as part of a surge, an enforcement surge in the St. Johnsbury and Orleans and the Newport area. And I just want to underscore what they're all saying. It takes all of us, not only federal, state, local, and county law enforcement, but the treatment and prevention and recovery communities. And if there's one thing to take away from tonight that I hope you'll take away from, it will take a holistic approach like that to make headway. And we are seeing some headway in terms of the reduction in overdose deaths this year that Kevin mentioned, but we have a long, long way to go. I do want to underscore that it's not just beyond the treatment, recovery, prevention, and enforcement communities, all of whom are pretty much represented up here. It takes all of you, and I want to echo what I think Sean said just now. It is so encouraging to see you out here and engaged and interested in this topic, because it really is going to take all of us. And I will even say that some of those arrests that happened in St. Johnsbury and Newport last week were the result of citizen calls. People in apartment buildings, multi-unit buildings, who are just trying to live their lives and deserve to have a peaceful home, and they're working hard every day, and they're supporting a family, called and said, there's drug dealers in this apartment building. That is so helpful to us, and we can investigate it in a way that, that prioritizes keeping the caller safe. Because your safety is obviously our reason for being here, right? We're all up here for your safety. The last thing I wanted to say in terms of, well, two other quick points, and then I promise I'll stop. But we do have an opioid crisis, and opioids are responsible for the largest share of deaths in Vermont and across the country. But please beware of the stimulants. Crack cocaine, powder cocaine, methamphetamine, really every kind of drug that can send a person down the wrong path. Those are making a comeback in Vermont. Methamphetamine is one of the scariest drugs there is. It is it's extremely pure these days because it's coming from Mexico. It's no longer manufactured in these amateur labs locally. It is coming from the cartels. It's incredibly pure. And people on meth are violent, delusional. They stay up for nights and nights on end. They abandon their families. There is no pill to treat stimulant addiction. There is no medically assisted treatment. It's just old school treatment, which can work, but it's going to be a whole new task to conquer if that continues to rear its head. So I'm trying to raise awareness about meth too. And I probably said way more than you wanted me to. But I'm happy to answer questions, but I do want to introduce my Deputy Criminal Chief, John Opart, who focuses in a programmatic way on our drug enforcement work.
Pleasure to be here tonight. John Opart, Deputy Criminal Chief. Appreciate the compliment, Christina. One of the things that we've been trying to do with our drug program is to balance between larger organizational targets, which Kevin Black's group does very well, folks who are together trafficking drugs up the I-91 corridor, frequently firearms heading south, and also focus on more local folks who are profiting from addiction, who made their lives selling drugs and paying for their own drugs that way, and trying to get those folks some attention and impetus to join the treatment community in a more serious way than they have before. They're vital partners for us. We have a lot of folks who are released pending trial into treatment, and I've heard feedback from some of Teresa's folks that when they're in federal court and they head to treatment, they amazingly don't come back to federal court in handcuffs. They come back for a sentencing that's a time-served sentence, and they're on supervised release, and they're on the track towards recovery. So we have to pick those targets wisely and try to add that impetus for a life-changing reflection moment. And that's part of our goal, is to find those folks who are the local facilitators, because they also help us build the case against the out-of-staters. Folks don't set up shop, as is commonly referred to, in a hotel room, because hotel rooms tend to get more scrutiny. They're setting up shops in people's homes, and the people whose homes they're picking are the folks who are tomorrow's witnesses for our bigger case. And we need those folks to be clean, sober, and most importantly, alive. You can't do a federal prosecution with a dead witness. You just can't. So our goal too is to get folks who are the local facilitators who are trapped in the downward spiral of addiction into treatment, so that we can make our cases against folks who are out-of-state targets. One of the things that we've also been focusing on is the role of landlords in the opiate crisis. I've been doing some outreach over the past couple of years, speaking to landlord groups. I've got another talk down in Bells Falls on Wednesday about the fact that landlords play a crucial role. There aren't a lot of folks who own their own house who end up in the spiral of addiction. Those do exist, but they tend to be folks who are tenants. And landlords have an obligation to be on the lookout for when folks are starting to abuse the people who are in an addicted situation, and have folks from out of town move in. There's a common practice in Vermont of trust and a handshake. It's one of the reasons I love this state and one of the reasons I moved here, but it doesn't work in real estate. Landlords need leases. Landlords need written requirements for no criminal activity in their property. Eviction is difficult in the state, is a big feedback I get from landlords when I give these talks. But if you're going to go down the road of eviction, you need to have the MO in your lease. We have tools and some suggestions and a model lease language on our website. It's www.justice.gov/USAO-VT. In addition, we do have some handouts on the table back there with some model leases as well about landlords' roles. And it's an important one, and we're not asking folks to stick their neck out and have confrontational moments. It's to loop in the police and to provide the necessary information, and most importantly, to take action in a lawful way with eviction when you have folks whose property is being abused, and the tenant is not the actual occupant, and instead a drug dealer has moved in. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Teresa.
All right, thank you very much. So some other things that we're doing in law enforcement is a DMI program, and the goal of that program was to combine the treatment, enforcement, and prevention, and bring it together. So as you've heard many of us say in the past and even tonight, that one particular agency can't do it alone. We have to do it together. We have to partner together. And one thing that we have learned is the more information we share, the stronger our partnership is, the more work we get done and we see results. And some of the things that we get for law enforcement and also out in the community, things that the DMI program will do is reports the overdose, it identifies some trends, it also does a review, and it does some education for fire, EMS, and law enforcement. Then they do some public outreach and presentation, identify communities and concerns that you all have. We talked a little bit earlier about fentanyl and the hazards and the dangers and the risks. And obviously, we see a lot in law enforcement, fire, and EMS, the overdose scenes. And some things that we have to be cautious about is safety. Safety of the law enforcement, EMS, and fire who's responding to those scenes, but also safety for our community members as well. And hospital personnel too, school teachers, all of us. Even if you're a chambermaid in a hotel room, you need to know what the dangers are, and you need to know what the packaging looks like, what the product looks like. A lot of times, some of the drug dealers will go into a hotel room, they'll spread the product all over the table. The chambermaid goes in and cleans up the room after, and it's got the residue and powder all over. We're going in to do search warrants in these houses. The law enforcement's there. You know, what are they going to do? They're going to get rid of the product, and you know, the airborne, it's all airborne and in the room. So we just need to be cautious, especially about fentanyl, because it is very potent. And in the hospital personnel, fire, EMS, coming in contact with that, a lot of times they'll have it in their pockets, and they'll also hide it in different areas on their body. So we talked about the safety concerns, but inhaling it is the most harmful effects. However, you can get skin contact, and so the most common route for exposure is inhaling the powdered drug or transfer from skin to your eyes, nose, or mouth. Oh, the other, just to back up a little bit, the other part about if you think you got it on your skin in the contact, don't use the hand sanitizers or the wipes because it opens the pores in your skin. They say use soap and water. And for us, when we test these, a lot of times if we if we know it's fentanyl and we're testing it, we'll send it right to our lab. But if we are testing it at we have a field testing kit, we'll have eye protection, we'll have a mask on, a coat, and then there's Narcan sitting right there by the test table, and there's another officer, detective, or trooper there with us. So if they do get an exposure, there's someone there to administer the Narcan. So some obviously safety recommendations. If you think you've been exposed, call 911. Sometimes Narcan, you need multiple doses. Sometimes it takes 2, 3, 4, 5. I've heard 7, 8, and 9 doses of Narcan, and I'm sure it's probably been more of that, more than that number. If you find the white powder, don't touch it. Keep away, keep others away. Call the authorities who are trained to handle the material. I'm going to talk about some of the current trends in threats within Vermont. I will have some photos in that of some other drugs. Obviously, heroin is still extremely prevalent here in Vermont, and we're seeing a large portion of it mixed with fentanyl. Almost 80% of our seizures has been heroin. The prices do continue to decrease now that it's readily available in our area. And some of the things that we're also seeing is fentanyl being pressed into pill form, so to look like more of like an Advil or something similar to that. A lot of times we'll find bulk Narcan at dealer locations when we're doing search warrants or searching cars. We'll see multiple packages of Narcan. And prescription cases, we're seeing those as well, but those have decreased, at least what we're seeing in the drug task force. Drug trafficking into the state, like I said before, is primarily from Massachusetts, New York, Connecticut, and we also are seeing drug trafficking organizations from New Jersey. We see a lot that guns are traded for drugs, both locally and on the streets and out of state. And most of our fentanyl, we have heroin laced with fentanyl, but we're also seeing straight fentanyl coming mainly from Western Massachusetts. I'll talk about the drug infrastructure. And basically, when I tell people how this is, what the organization is, if I look at it more of like a manufacturer. So you have your manufacturer, and then you have your distributors, and then you have your retailers, and then you have your end users. And we have different levels of, in the drug trafficking organizations, we have the cartel, and then we have the domestic distributors, and then we have what we call a level 4, which are mostly out of state, and they stay out of state. They usually send people up into our state to sell the product. We have obviously suppliers that live out of state, but they travel to Vermont basically to sell their drugs. They set up in different houses around our communities. A lot of times the people that will bring these drugs up, they're younger and have minimal criminal history. We also have the local users who are providing housing for the level 4, and they're tripping back and forth to pick up the drugs. They're picking up the drug dealers as well as just picking up the drugs and bringing it back into the state. We have the local users that are selling to support their own habit, and then we have the local users who are only using and not selling. This is crack cocaine. It comes in different packages, different sizes, usually a yellow or a white, kind of an off-white, white, creamy color. And we're seeing a lot of increase in crack cocaine. Powder cocaine is typically the white powder. Sometimes can be a little bit of a grayish or even a little brown tint. We have seen cocaine that's been colored, and back probably, I don't know, 8 years ago or so, I bought pink cocaine because they were mixing it with something else. So it can be any color, but that's typically what it looks like. Some more packaging. A lot of times they'll use a little sandwich baggies and tie off the corners of the baggies. They also have the little plastic bags with the little markings on, little decorations. Sometimes it's Mickey Mouse or some type of stamp on the package. And as a parent, you have to be cautious when you go. We went to a park somewhere in Burlington, and there were some heroin bags and then some of those plastic bags. And what's a little kid want to do? Bend over and pick it up. So just be mindful of that. This is some paraphernalia, things that we see in cars. Again, as parents, community members, teachers, these are things that signs of drug use. These are what we call, a lot of times we'll see these, we call them like crank bites or marks on them. They'll pick on their face sometimes, and this is an indicator sometimes of a drug user. This is spice. Bath salts. You'll hear of bath salts where people will go and use bath salts, and then they'll start tweaking out or doing crazy things or getting very violent. This isn't the bath salt that you're going to go buy at a country store and go home and take a bath. This is something a little bit different than that. You buy it a lot of time in head shops or smoke shops. LSD. Ecstasy, and these are also college and younger members of the community, and they have different markings. Sometimes you see the Nike swoosh or the different markings on them. The different color kind of looks like candy. Signs of a meth lab, and U.S. Attorney Christina Nolan was mentioning the meth. And back a couple of years ago, we were seeing a lot of these meth labs called the one-pot method, where people were buying these chemicals at local hardware stores and different stores throughout the community, and they're making meth, which could be very, very dangerous. And these are some products that, if you see them in an area, if you're a landlord or a parent or see them on the street, on the side of the road, sometimes the soda bottles with the plastic tubes coming out, those are one-pot method for meth. So just be careful of those. A lot of times Green Up Day, I know people were calling in some of these that were tossed out on the side of the road. And just as another form of methamphetamine, sometimes they can be in capsule forms. I have bought it in the capsule form back a few years ago. And again, it's usually a white color, but we've also had it in this pinkish, seen it in the pink. This is crystal meth. This is what they were talking about earlier, coming from Mexico. This looks like shards of glass. It's very clear, and this is what we're saying is very, very dangerous, and it's not a good product to have on the street for sure. So we call meth mouth, someone who uses methamphetamine. The BHO labs, this is honey butane oil, and they use the marijuana and butane oil. It's very dangerous. It can cause explosions. A lot of times we'll see college kids doing this. And that's all I have. Do we have any questions? We can start out. If not, we'll go down the panel again, and they can give some more information and talk about, we haven't heard from recovery or treatment, so want to give those folks some time to talk, and anyone else on the panel. Are there any questions that anyone has out there, or any concerns, things that you've seen, something that's been on your mind, something you've seen maybe in the community and wondering, is this a sign of drug use, or what should I do in this particular situation? Yes?
Thank you, Chris Runyon, for yelling. I think I've heard it said, and I have not, I've heard it before, that you treat addicts, for lack of a better word, differently than sellers. But if you pull somebody over, how do you know that person didn't just make a buy, or that person is coming up here to sell whatever you found?
Yeah, there's many different ways that we start and end an investigation. So the officers are trained for different situations such as that. A lot of times it's talking to the person and trying to figure out what is happening. But there's a lot of different ways that we investigate, and knowing if someone is a user or coming up to sell the product. There's several different ways that we look into that. I don't know if anybody wants to chime in on that.
So I assume you're asking if somebody's pulled over and they have drugs on them. So I mean, first of all, if they have drugs on them, that's going to be addressed, whether it's on the state side or the federal side. They're not going to just be released, and those drugs are going to be seized, and fortunately, lethal doses taken off the street. But one of the things we'll look at for sure, so you're basically talking about a reactive case where we haven't had time to investigate yet, we just stumble upon it. You look at the quantity of the drugs and whether they're consistent with distribution quantities or user quantities. And one or two bags of heroin or fentanyl or a mix is consistent with user quantity, but 50, 100 bags, or, God forbid, but it happens, thousands, is obviously consistent with being a dealer, whether you're using some of it yourself and dealing some of it to others or not. Now, we also find people with large amounts of cash, which is obviously, especially when it's unexplained, which it usually is, indicative of it being used, of it being criminal proceeds. And we also find people far too commonly who have distributional quantities of drugs who are clearly, in our view, dealers who have firearms. And the reason firearms is indicative, and let me just say, under federal law, you are not allowed to possess a firearm in connection with the drug trade, and the penalties for doing that are 5 to 40 years. And we charge that case, 5 to life. And we charge that case all the time. But if they have a gun and other indicators, that gun could be indicative of wanting to protect their drug stash and use it to enforce their drug business and collect debts and so forth. So there are a number of things we look at.
So I do investigations and assessments for DCF Family Services, and I guess my question is, being out in the field where I am working a lot with families who are using and many other things as well, but you talked about some things that can be deadly if we're exposed to that, and we don't carry Narcan or anything along those lines, and oftentimes we don't have cell phone service either. So I'm just curious around some early warning signs that we can be aware of that we've been exposed to it, or how we may know that we have been exposed to it.
Does anybody want to? Yes. You can get some. Hey, you can get it for free.
So
yes.
You make sure that you get Narcan, okay? Because
And I'm not sure what policy we're even allowed to, but Catherine,
I'm sure they wouldn't mind. So,
But I guess my question is still the same. So it's what are some symptoms or signs I could be aware of myself if I've potentially been exposed to that?
you can answer that better than I can.
Does anybody want to answer that question?
So I'll take that. So being a former heroin user myself, some of the signs and symptoms might be you start to feel sweaty, clammy, you could, potentially feel nauseous. And the main thing, so those are just some of the bare minimum of what you would feel if you had been exposed. And short of, having a profound exposure, like, pure fentanyl, you'd essentially probably fall out. You would be, and if you're alone in a home with, somebody, then that could be relatively dangerous, especially not having, cell phone service. And I'm not sure if you guys go in pairs out when you're visiting people, if you're going with another agency. So, would be looking into. But those, for me, I think would be some of the pure symptoms where where you're feeling nauseous and you're sweaty, maybe some jumbled thoughts, wanting to fall asleep, things like that. You're welcome. John, oh.
I think I heard Sean with security mention the southern border, and I also heard Christina talk about some of the, I think it was meth coming from Mexico. This question could be for either of you, but how much of the drugs in Vermont are ultimately coming from outside the country? I know it's initially coming from neighboring states, but what's coming from further out?
Well, the hard drugs it's pretty much all coming from outside of the country. That's what, yeah. So there is some marijuana. So there are some states that are manufacturing some marijuana and that they're probably shipping it around the country, but the hard drugs is coming from outside the country.
Mexico and China, primarily.
We have been seeing a large insurgence of postal delivery, UPS, FedEx, from overseas, including from Europe. So traditional importation methods are not, across the southern border, are still very much prevalent, but that's not the only way in which it's getting into the country. I prosecuted a case a little bit ago that made the news because it was a sled full of Xanax being dragged south across the northern border. So we do still have hard drugs that come south as well. It isn't simply drugs from coming up from Mexico, importation from China into Canada, fentanyl in particular. So there are multiple routes of importation, but other than the bottle shake for meth, which is on the substantial decline because meth is so cheap to buy in much purer form, there is no real production in the U.S.
So first, thank you, everybody, for coming as a citizen of this community. And given the area that I particularly live in, I am aware of a lot of drug activity, or so we think, But what I'm hearing a lot of that is a concern for me is there's a lot of talk going on up there about that you can't prosecute your way out of the addiction. Addiction. And so what I worry about is that there's not enough treatment for the amount of, the amount of people that are getting arrested for this. You're seeing the same names in the paper all the time. The same people are getting arrested. The law enforcement are going through and doing their jobs all the time. The attorneys are doing their jobs all the time. I understand that the prisons are full, but as a citizen, when you sit back and you look at your homes are being robbed, you're not feeling safe with children out in the community, you start to wonder, how does this process really work? And so when you're talking about that, you'd like to have them seek more treatment, there's not a lot of treatment. There's the Kingdom Recovery Center, which I am a huge advocate for. We have BART in the area. But Valley Vista really is there's two places now in the state. And so I just am wondering, when we talk about treatment, what does that look like? What is your hopes? What is your plans? How does the community know that is what is going to happen and what we want to happen? Does that make any sense? I don't know what to tell you.
This is a really good team here.
That made perfect sense, actually. And it's a big question, a really, really big one. First of all, I think one of the things that you're seeing up here, which is sort of is really important to recovery and treatment, a lot of people already talked about connection. the recovery center, Kingdom Recovery Center, is a big piece of that. Someone's enduring recovery really have to do with their ability to connect with other people that are in recovery, and they play a big role in that. But I think that what you're seeing up here, whether state's attorneys, U.S. attorney, police, enforcement, treatment community, recovery community, prevention, we're all connected at a certain level. And our hope is that by doing that, the people that we serve also get connected. You talk about treatment. This is, and some of the people that I work with that are here have probably heard me say this before, but there's just not enough time. We started out, Valley Vista started out as a facility that offered 6 months of treatment. Eventually it went to 90 days. Now our average length of stay is about 21 to 26 days. There are, I'm trying to figure out how to put this tactfully, but there are entities that exist that believe 14 days is enough for opioid use disorder treatment. When you look at an individual, excuse me, that is in acute withdrawal, maybe 3 or 4 days, by the time they go through that process and their head starts to clear, we're at what, maybe 7, 8 days? And oftentimes, there's usually, and more often than not, there's a co-occurring condition that exists. Just as a quick aside, I mean, a lot of people talk about marijuana being the gateway drug. I saw something, and I'm afraid to say, I think I saw this on Facebook, that the gateway drug, if you will, is trauma. More often than not, people that are suffering from substance use disorder are dealing with trauma-related issues, whether it's ACE or some other type traumatic event. So if you're now at 8, 10 days of treatment and somebody is only going to be granted, if you will, a 14-day stay or even a 21-day stay, how do we deal with that? It's a problem. So one of the things, and as I started talking, I was talking about connections, is this collaboration that exists here. So whether it's Valley Vista, obviously, is the first place that someone would come to get detox, to have some residential care, basically get some initial tools to work with, but it's what happens post-discharge. So it's connecting with Cindy and her team at the recovery center. It's connecting with BART if an individual is going on an MAT program, or treatment associates or Chittenden Clinic, wherever. Because I mean, for all intents and purposes, we are a statewide agency. But it's also sober living. So recognizing all the resources that we have available to us, from treatment to post-discharge, sober living, intensive outpatient, all those different programs that exist, and even individualized therapy, how can we, for all intents and purposes, create an effective 90-day treatment? That's what we're trying to get to. We recognize, I think there was, Dr. Simpatico, who is the, I think he heads up the psychiatry department at University of Vermont Medical Center, who talked, and scientific evidence has shown us that 90 days at a minimum is what it takes for an individual to start to experience brain chemistry change so that they can start actually moving in a more positive direction during recovery. So what we all need to do in having connections with one another is to create that effective 90 days of treatment. What's the thread that exists from the time someone comes in that detoxes with us? We get them on a path towards that notion of enduring recovery, working with Cindy, working with Vermont Foundation of Recovery, any of the other providers that are there, so that we can ultimately, and even drug treatment courts, for example. That's one of the things that Vermont does very well. In fact, Vermont is very much ahead of the curve in dealing with this crisis. But there's only 4 drug treatment courts, as I understand it, around the state. And I think in Orleans County and
we don't have any drug.
There's a family treatment court, which is which is a slight evolution of that and more encompassing. And those are innovative things, and those are pieces that would play into that notion of getting somebody towards that point of enduring recovery, where we can create that effective 90-day treatment. So that's what a lot of this is about, is to getting to that place. And a lot of it starts here. I mean, this is pretty amazing that there is many people here from the community, many of whom we're already involved with in working towards that end. The community coalitions, the DARTs, for example, Drug Abuse Response Team, prevention coalitions, and they're statewide in all the different counties, towns, and it's pretty amazing. And again, it's at the community level where it's going to start to really make a difference.
So So part of the Kingdom Recovery Center is we offer peer-to-peer support for individuals who are suffering from a substance use disorder. A lot of times we do get referrals from DCF, Easter Seals. Valley Vista will call us when somebody's getting ready to come out, and we'll send a recovery coach there. All of the 12 centers of Vermont travel to each of the 3 treatment centers that we have. Serenity House is also open. And so somebody from the Vermont Recovery Network is going there and talking about all of our services. So again, it is the main connection with folks. More recently, we're funded through the State Department of Health through ADAP program, Alcohol Division of Substance Abuse. I can't think of it. Catherine's looking at me. But we got this grant to where anybody who shows up into an emergency room, either through an opioid overdose or by some way of some other means, say they'd fallen because they happen to be intoxicated, we're getting pages from the recovery center, and we're sending a recovery coach up there to talk to them, to provide them with information and resources. We'll set them up with intakes to go into Valley Vista if that's, something that they wish. And then, we'll follow up and call them every day for 10 days. And, and that's the extent of the program. After 10 days, our hope is that they've found some type of treatment program to engage in. And coming up in January, we're also going to start rapid access to medications, to where individuals that come in that identify as a good fit to be on a medication-assisted treatment will get inducted right there in the ER and then transitioned into BART, a couple of days later. So there's other methods out there that are, available to folks. But again, if people don't want to get well, then they're not going to get well. And we can't force somebody into treatment. We can't force them into recovery. It's going to be when they're ready and pretty much on their terms. As much as we know how badly they need it, it's until they have that pivotal moment and realize that, it's time that I get help. And so there's people like us who will always be there, because eventually treatment does end for some folks, but recovery is a lifetime of, work. That's harder work than being a drug addict, what I found. It really, really is, because it's something you have to work on every day. And some folks, you have to work on your traumas and things like that, because traumas, if they're not dealt with, then these issues are still going to be there, because there's always going to be a recurrence of a flashback or a memory or something. And until, we can work with the prevention, and then, this is where it's going to start, because when prevention starts with somebody who's in recovery, because you've changed your ways, you've changed your life, and you're leading by example for your children that you are now having. And so that's kind of where we kind of intertwine with prevention, because once we help people, on that path of recovery, then that's going to change, the scenario for the next, younger generations coming up. So that's about all I have. You want to go on, Tenny?
Yeah, thank you. So on the other side of this, we have prevention and prevention services at NVRH. We are grant funded. It's called the Regional Prevention Partnerships Grant, and it is to reduce adolescent and young adult substance abuse. And mainly this is underage and binge drinking from the age of 12 to 20, reduce prescription drug misuse and abuse from ages 12 to 25, and the reduction in marijuana consumption, originally from ages 12 to 25, but because of the new law that has passed, it's from 12 to 20. We also have a non-competitive tobacco grant that is to reduce the prevalence of tobacco use. And of course, everybody has heard about the lung injury cases that are claiming many deaths at a very rapid pace throughout our nation. So we do a lot of education, community forums. We could not do our work without our community collaborations. Everybody here at the table, everybody here in the room, it's really about breaking down the silos and building the capacity of our community. And we do a lot of this with youth. We are in a lot of the schools to provide education, and we listen to the youth. They really know what's going on at their level. Us as adults, we think that we know what is best for the youth, but we really have to look to them to kind of guide us, to help us put in the best programs possible. Evidence-based programming is what we like to help bring into the community, such as in a school is drug impairment training for educational professionals. That is run by what is called a DRE, a drug recognition expert will come in and provide a training for educational professionals to be able to kind of spot somebody who is under the influence. and then the educational professionals can take action on that in a way that they see fit according to their policies. We also talked about landlords up here. We also provide kind of sample language, especially around marijuana and tobacco products. We may say or give them some example language about cultivation of marijuana in the home. And a lot of this education and these policies are to change the social norms. I know John talked about the kind of like the ACEs. We look at the risk and protective factors of the family as well, kind of decides on how we put a program in place, or we help to. Obviously, we need a school or an agency to facilitate that program, but we can kind of offset maybe some of the costs of getting that program or that training in place to really change the tides of our young and future generations who will, you know, become prominent leaders in our area to really take over, and hopefully that it can change it and get to the parents to change what they may be doing, what they think is right in the home around their children, but they don't really think that it is a risk, especially like if somebody was vaping next to their child in the home and they thought it was, you know, a potentially good idea, but they just found out, okay, maybe it's not. Or if they're, you know, leaving their prescription medications out, we talk about safe storage. We talk about drop boxes. We partner with local law enforcement about the drug take-back days, and we have medication lock bags for home storage. Now we talk about marijuana storage. That's going to be a big issue here. And yeah, so it's a lot of education, and it's a lot of community collaboration that goes across the board, especially with our coalitions and everybody here. So it really starts with everybody in this room too, and spreading the word.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing too I just want to touch on real quick is a lot of times I'll meet with families and parents after an arrest or something, a big event like that has happened, and I say to them, by the time I get involved, it's pretty late in the game. And the parents a lot of times will admit, I knew there was a problem. So don't do it alone. Don't feel embarrassed or ashamed to get help. That's what all of these people are here for. They're here to give you the help, the assistance that you need. And you're not, all of us have been touched by this in one way or another, whether it was a family member or a friend of a friend, or somehow we've all been touched by it, and trying to do it in close of the family and thinking the family can do it. We've seen time and time again that you really can't, that you really need to reach out to all of the resources out there and to get some help that way. Yes.
Several of you have mentioned the DART group. So we do meet in St. Johnsbury. We're a drug abuse resistance team, and we're meeting on the second Tuesday of the month for community. In Orleans, they meet at Peter, the Prevention, Intervention, Treatment, Recovery group. So those are meeting. If people want to get involved, anybody at the table, I'm sure, can help direct you to that. I have a specific question about a system that the U.S. Marshal Service has about taking houses when there's a building that has been identified and there's some agreement with USDA, and then USDA has an agreement with turning a house into a sober house. I wonder if any of you have experience with that and can talk us through that process, and is that something that is available in this area?
I think the program you're referring to is colloquially known as Wheat and Seed of the U.S. Marshals Service. A similar program was done down in Rutland a little bit ago by a colleague of ours in our office. It's a difficult process to play out because there's a recognition that a lot of multi-unit dwellings, there are folks who are perfectly innocent who are there, and displacing folks from affordable housing is not something we want to be in the business of doing. So landlords play an important role in our communities of providing affordable housing to some folks who need it, and not everyone who's the tenant in a multi-unit dwelling, you know, should be have the cart overturned, if you will. We try to pick those targets carefully, and there are a ton of work and a ton of lead time. One of the reasons the one in Rutland worked out so well was because the owners got on board with the process and wanted to offload the property. If they hadn't, we'd still be litigating it, and it happened about 2.5 years ago. So those processes are a tool in our toolbox, but it's not one we can bring to every community in Vermont, unfortunately. We are hoping to enlist landlords as a support structure for our efforts. I think there's much more leverage to be gained there from flipping one property. If we can get a dozen landlords in St. Johnsbury to put up an extra camera in a parking lot that turns into the key footage for a shooting that unfortunately happens in the future, that's going to be a bigger win than necessarily flipping one property into a forfeited asset that gets part of the weed and seed program you're referencing. We do look hard at criminal forfeiture. Criminal forfeiture is when the landowner themselves is criminally responsible for the conduct. Civil forfeiture can be used against folks who simply tolerate wrongdoing on their property. Criminal forfeiture is used against folks who are actively engaged in the wrongdoing on their property. One of the ones down in Rutland was similar in the sense that the property manager who was employed down there was engaged in the wrongdoing. It's much easier to show. So we do that around the state. We recently forfeited a property in one of my cases in Lamoille County in Morrisville. An out-of-state mother-daughter pair bought a house out of foreclosure in cash with drug proceeds, and we were able to forfeit that property. And we're in discussions with Marshal Service how best to move forward. The Marshal Service isn't in the business of losing money. No government agency likes to necessarily lose money. We try to break even on our criminal forfeitures, which is unfortunately a reality of it. And it costs a lot of money to take a property, fight the legal fights, maintain the property through the whole period of that legal fight, and then sell it. And you're talking tens of thousands of dollars in property management fees and just maintenance and upkeep. So it's a tool we have, and it's a tool that we try to employ carefully and strategically in folks on properties that are particularly deserving. And it's a conversation we have with our state and local partners as well, and it's a conversation we continue to have.
Yeah, I'm just going to add, in every drug case where there's a property that is a hotspot, we look at our federal forfeiture options. And as he just said, and congratulations to him, he's one of our great AUSAs, he just got a property taken in Lamoille County that was purchased with drug proceeds. And so that will no longer be a drug den and a place people go to buy drugs. So that's great. It is a hard process, whether you do it criminally or civilly, but I just want everyone to know we look at it every time there is a problem property involved, and we encourage state and local partners and federal partners, of course, to let us know if there's a place in your community that is routinely the place that cars are coming and going from out of state, and everyone knows it's a drug house. And, I can't get into details of what's under investigation, but we're actively looking at that all over the state because there's a civil process, which takes a very long time, and there are equitable considerations that he mentioned, whether there are innocent tenants and so forth. But it can be done. It has been done both civilly and through criminal forfeiture. And we've got 2 properties in Windsor we're trying to take through criminal forfeiture right now. Have we taken them yet? No, we're trying to take them. So I just wanted to jump on and let you know we look at it in every single case, but it's tough.
Yes, Lisa.
And I work on site quite a bit, so I see a lot of stuff that takes place. I've made a couple of phone calls to the state police, and I've left messages with the receptionist, and I never got any phone calls back. So who should I be reaching out to?
Me.
You.
Yes, I cover the whole north. I'm the lieutenant, the commander of the Northern Vermont Drug Task Force, so I cover the whole north and the St. Johnsbury area, Caledonia County, Orleans County. So I field a lot of those calls, and typically when a sergeant gets an email, text, or a phone call from their boss saying, can you please look into this, and then a day later get another call, what happened with that? They tend to do it. So I'm the one. And you can get a hold of me through headquarters. I'm also on the website, on our state police website as well. So we can.
So I've witnessed out-of-state cards, black eyes that will go with the units, and they'll stay there for a week, or they'll stay there for 2 nights. And when they're here, you see a lot of traffic in and out. So, like my tenants will come to me, and they're scared, and I try to talk to them, but I tell them, bring down the license plate numbers, because that's gonna probably be a huge. So what are some of the things that we should be giving to you guys to help you guys out?
Definitely license plate numbers are key. There is a software program, it's on our website, that a web address, I should have put it up here, that actually is an anonymous tip line that goes out to us. I get those on a daily basis, and the sergeants in charge of the areas get those as well. Believe it or not, a plate number, description of a car, activity, in and out of a house, it seems like very, very minimal to an investigation, but it's huge. So all of that information combined with what we have already is sometimes the key to finding the offender who committed the homicide a couple of months ago, because we had somewhat of a description of a car, knew it was an out-of-state car, but we don't know exactly what it is. The citizen will call, this is the information I have, we look back at video, bingo, there we go, we've got the car. So just those little tips are very important. The other thing to keep in mind is that for us, the investigations that we do, we have to do a lot of work. We can't just go on somebody calling us up and say, there's a lot of drug activity here, I think there's drug dealing. Yeah, you're probably right, there is, but for us to just go in there, bust through the door, knock on the door, we can't do that. We have to have a warrant, or we have to have drug buys into there, or a car stop or something connecting that. Sometimes it takes time. We have investigations that go years, that our work continue with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the local state's Attorney's Office, that the investigations continue, and people feel like nothing's getting done. I called this tip in, the police have this information, they're not doing anything about it. But the good thing is, in most of those cases, it's because our guys are doing and girls are doing a good job not letting the community know that they're doing undercover investigations, because that is something that we have to keep kind of private, and we can't share a lot of that information. There's a lot more going on in our community as far as drug work, things that are happening right now that we may not see a result for a year, 2 years down the road, and even then it continues on. I will tell you right now, all law enforcement, and I know my detectives have missed multiple family events. They've missed sporting events. They missed their little girl's father-daughter dance where she had her dress and dad didn't go because he was out doing a drug investigation. All law enforcement are out there working hard, but those little pieces of information can be huge. So you're doing the right thing, write down all of that. They mentioned putting out there cameras. Cameras are huge, especially if you have a property and you're constantly seeing some activity, and we're able to view that and say, oh, we know who this is. And the other thing we have kind of working against us sometimes, a lot of these drug trafficking organizations, people that come up to distribute these drugs, they're saying their name is one thing, but it really isn't. Well, we know them by a street name. We know them by an initial today. They go back to Massachusetts, they'll come back 6 months later, and there'll be a different street name. So street names are helpful for us. We have an intel sharing system that, we call up our partners and say, we've got this, what do you know about them? And they can identify. Mass State Police, they're on our speed dial. We're calling them, they're calling us all the time. They're picking people off all the time. And that's something that I've started to track, actually, is drugs that are seized out of state that were destined to come to Vermont that never made it to our state because they're getting picked up in Massachusetts or Connecticut. Vermont residents, I'd say probably several times a week, I'm getting information coming from Massachusetts saying, we arrested this Vermont resident in this town with either drugs, money, guns, whatever it is. So we're all communicating, and that helps us as well. So, I thought I saw other questions. Yes?
Yes, first of all, I want to say thank you to all of you for all your hard work in trying to make our community safe. I guess my question probably deals more with prevention, but in light of our state legislature legalizing certain amounts of marijuana and that being the gateway drug, how do we reach the next generation, helping them to understand the dangers that exist in that, and not allowing them to get into the mentality, well, it was illegal one time, now it's legal, well, the rest of this stuff will become legal eventually. So this is all just a matter of perspective. How do we reach the next generation?
Yeah, that is a good question. I kind of look at it like our alcohol crisis as well, because that's so widely accepted. It's, how do we reach even kids about underage binge drinking? And now we're running into that same problem that is becoming so normalized to use marijuana in the home or to cultivate it in the home. How are we going to reach the youth? It's the same issue. We really try to reach the parents. We try to educate them on everything that we know about marijuana. We even have in the back, we have a prenatal marijuana task force at the hospital as well. Some of the members are in here, and we have information on that. We'll be making, movies on that. It's really just all the education that we can get out there to the parents and to the youth. Here, the St. Johnsbury School has been wonderful about letting us in, and many other schools have been wonderful. It's just continual education so that these youth can start making their own informed decisions. So it's, just keep harping on them and let them know that there's consequences. There's, consequences to their brain development, their IQs, and we try to just go over it with them. We try not to really present at them or talk at them, but just have a general conversation and teach them that there's, these risk factors, and that eventually they'll have to, grow up to make an actual decision and to think long-term instead of short-term. So just education, 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 and then try to work with even the members up here. If there's a problem in the home, sometimes DCF has to be called. If it's a lot of drug use in front of children, that call has to be made, unfortunately. But yeah, it's just trying to reach them and get it through to them. And the more we do it, and hopefully the more we can change the social norms. Actually, one other thing I would like to say on that too is we try to look for sustainable success. We do that a lot with our policies. I believe that a substance use policy in an area can change a larger social norm of our community. You look at St. Johnsbury with the smoking bans, or Lindenville, the parks with the smoking or substance use bans, and Danville with the town field as a substance use ban. That's teaching the youth that this is not okay, and hopefully we can get it to the public.
I chime in real quick because I can't resist. We have this prevention project in my office. It's a documentary, 10 minutes long. It's about the story of a former defendant of mine who committed very serious crimes. He had no criminal record, but he was a very addicted individual. He's 4 years sober now, and we're still friends, even though I prosecuted him. And we're taking this documentary about his life live, he and I, to schools. And letting the kids, after we show it to them, interact with us and ask questions. And one of the first questions we've been getting, 7th grade through seniors, is, well, if we shouldn't use marijuana, why is it being made legal? And what I want to say is, it's making your job harder, and it makes the question harder to answer. But I echo what you just said, and that is by providing facts. And the fact is, everyone agrees, including the Surgeon General and physicians in Vermont, that sustained high rates of use of marijuana are terrible for the young mind. It reduces IQ, it leads to lack of motivation, poor work outcomes, and it is associated with use of more serious drugs, more potent drugs down the line. So you keep telling the truth, and people will do what they'll do. But the facts about marijuana use, and particularly its effect on the young mind and in utero and so forth, it's not good for it.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I think, it's about coping skills, and marijuana and even alcohol to a certain extent is about trying to escape from a reality. So if we are able to teach kids better coping skills, that it is okay for a young male to show emotion, that they don't have to be as tough as they were brought up to be, or as we were brought up to be during the course of our lives, and sort of debunk these stereotypes as to what male and female models are supposed to be like. The other thing that, oftentimes we watch movies, or we're shown movies that are really terrific, whether it's The Hungry Heart, Chasing the Dragon, movies like that are really sort of in the problem and showing you the downside of addiction and opioid use and drug use in general. It's United Way of the Adirondacks, or North Country. Beginning of this year, they released a 34-minute film called Addicted to Hope. And what that has done, it's taking a look at people's lives after they've come out of their addiction, how fulfilling their lives have become. A business leader who has really started to get other businesses in the community to hire, something that we're doing here in Vermont, people that are in recovery. Also taking a look at the impact that addiction has had on kiddos, and having their parents taken away or being set up with their grandfolks. But it's a very, very positive film that could be shared with kids, even adults, that has a very positive outcome and shows the benefits of recovery from addiction and the benefits of treatment. So it's kind of the other side of some of the things that we've become so accustomed to seeing, like Chasing the Dragon and Addicted to Hope, which are really terrific in and of themselves. But again, it's another point of view that I think is really, it's very positive and very reinforcing about that there is an alternative to a life that goes down that road, as unfortunate as it is. So Addicted to Hope.
All right, do we have any other questions or comments? Yes.
Turn back over here before same names over and over again. I guess this is a question for state prosecutors. Do you feel that the laws in Vermont, they're older, I guess you could say, but do you think they adequately address what you're seeing today for both treatment and punishment to incorporate those two things?
No. So our process is not at all equipped to deal with addiction, or really to deal with addiction at all. So the judges that we have are not holding people. So people, and I talked a little bit with a reporter earlier, Chris Roy, about this. So in federal court, if you're arrested, you could be forced into treatment or held or detained. And in state court, that's just not going to happen. And so we see the same people come back and come back again, and we may say, please don't use drugs anymore, or please don't sell. But they're still doing that, and there's not a consequence with the state judges on an immediate level, the way there is with federal court. So they also have the ability to monitor people while charges are pending, to drug test them. We just don't have that, and our cases are pending for a long period of time. And so we are just not adequately equipped to deal with addiction. So we are dealing with it in sort of a reactive way, and not a way that addresses the problem in the immediate. And that's just the facts of what our system is. And I think that Christina could talk a little bit about their ability to address it in a more swift fashion, but we're just not seeing that.
it is a different system. So in federal court, you can be held pending trial if we can show that you pose a danger to the community, or a danger to the community, any person in the community, that no conditions of release can ameliorate. So there's no conditions that can be set to make people safe from you. Or if we can show there are no conditions that can be set that will assure your appearance in court. And so we move for detention under that statute when we think it's appropriate a lot. Oftentimes, it'll be people suffering from substance use disorder who are detained, oftentimes because they're found to be dangerous because their addiction is motivating what they do, and they need to pay for it. And so they're selling drugs, or they're engaging in violence, or they're robbing convenience stores, or what have you. So they may be detained pending trial. Now, they can we may agree, and they may ask to be released into treatment. Now, not everybody gets to be released into treatment, because if you have a serious enough offense or a serious enough record, that's just not appropriate. It may be our view, it's just not appropriate. You need to be incarcerated pending trial. But we do have people released into treatment often. We often agree to it, particularly if they don't have a bad record already, and we think we want to give them a chance at a resolution that's not a long jail sentence. But it all depends on the individual case.
If I could just sort of add to that somewhat. About 2 years ago, Judge Grierson's office, Chief Administrative Judge for the state of Vermont, reached out to us, and one of the things that Valley Vista has enjoyed doing has been to work with newly either appointed or elected judges at every level to come in, and they kind of get stuck with me for about 3 hours and learn about our program, sit with my clinical team to talk about the population that would ultimately or may possibly stand before them, so that they have a better understanding of the type of individual, the motivations, some of the challenges that they're going to face. So hopefully that equips them better to work with the state's attorneys as well as the U.S. attorney in working with this population. Not sure that necessarily answers your question, but I think that, we talked about connection, and this is just about getting more and more educated at every level, and sort of, as Tenny had said earlier, really breaking down the silos amongst the different agencies around the state so that we can work better together going forward in helping this population.
I think one of the challenges that we see with those on probation are the lack of conditions that allow us to respond more immediate, and then with the court backlog as well. We can have somebody go on a high-speed chase. I got a call the other night at 3 in the morning, and I had to ask them to have them report to the office the next day, because the condition that we had was, you shall not be convicted of another offense. So it may appear that we're not doing anything, but our hands often are tied. We can only supervise to whatever conditions that the court gives us. Furlough, we certainly have more of a response. Depending upon the behavior, we do have the ability to incarcerate should we need to. But it is difficult and challenging, I think, with the lack of probation conditions sometimes that we have.
I've been around St. Johnsbury for a very long time. It's really bad. So the town's not really as bad as I thought it was when I moved back. It's quite a beautiful town. You guys are doing a great job. It seems to me, from one of my experiences, is that if someone needs treatment or help or an avenue, that's great and well-funded if you're over 18. But if you're under 18, it seems to me that there's a serious lack of help and network or safety net in prevention or treatment or counseling mandatory of people under 18. I called the hospital. It wasn't what I expected to get help for someone. The CHAPD has been outstanding, but their hands are tied. They can only do so much. But, I'm aware of Art. They do a great job. I keep getting told that this guy needs help, but I know he can't get help until he's 18 and gets arrested. And he's an assistant. When he came back from, junkie life of his parents when he was 15. So 15, I called the opioid crisis hotline for Vermont. he said, can't help it, sorry. 16, I called DCF, okay? They said, we'll try to help you, but you're going to give this kid a room, and you're going to feed this kid, and you're going to take care of him. So there's other people in the state that don't have that, so we're not going to be able to help him. So now he's 17, turned into an alcoholic. He's going to go to jail, and there's nothing you guys can do to help. To my knowledge, for 3 years, I've been trying to find Valley Vista. I'm aware. I called your place too. They wouldn't take it in. So you got this kid's 15, 16, 17. His parents are junkies, and I mean the real ones that you guys talk about, the ones we see in paper. Okay, where's his help? And I'm not putting it on him. Okay, maybe this is a loophole that hasn't been addressed. Maybe it's not funny. I understand how it works. I definitely think that you're not caring about it. This is what you do for a job. But here's a kid that he's 17 and he's not in school. Okay? So, and all of his friends are in school. So this is a big issue. So when you say you're going to the schools and you help, that's awesome. For the kids that are in school, but the kids that have already failed out of school or withdrew or just didn't go, they refuse to go to the Arlington school because it has a bad reputation. It's great school. Great school. So it seems like this one kid that I've been trying to help for 3 years, I don't know business, and I have currently 4 people in recovery working for me, and so that's a big part of my life, right? So I just don't know, and I'll be up here, and I really appreciate you being here, Teresa, But so this kid, I can't get him any help. I've gone above the DCF, which is now, I think, Eccles or something. Okay? Well, what are they going to do to help this kid? He doesn't want counseling. He won't go get help. He's under 18. So we've got this sponge of a kid that's just kind of flopping from side to side. That's a big question.
Well, I'm sorry that you called us and weren't able to get any kind of direction, and you can call me, and I'll give you my card after this because I can help with that. As you may know, we did have an adolescent program until June. We shuttered it at the end of June of 2018, and that was largely in part because our census was so low. We, at that time, our population that we were serving was from 13 to 17 years old, and we were operating at about 60% of our census, and we had, not often, but at times, a up to 3-week wait list on the men's unit. So empty beds and people waiting was not a good formula, because sometimes when people wait, not such good things happen.
When I called the Valley Vista, I'd been called by the Camden, New Hampshire police. They had found him with his mother, who had kept him in a camper for 8 days, feeding him crystal meth, heroin, and other drugs. So
It's
really
terrible.
looking for a crisis, something that I didn't know how to handle.
Sure, sure.
I've been a bartender around this town, so I can deal with it. But that's a big thing to do.
Is he a Vermont resident? Just out of curiosity? Okay. So after we shuttered the program, we worked with ADAP to help identify another facility that's actually in New York State that's very good. It's St. Joseph's Treatment Center. They bought a place by the name of Rose Hill. And if he has Vermont Medicaid, and if not, he can get on it pretty quickly, and he can get situated there. They have programs for 12 to 16, I think, and then 17 to 22.
It's all voluntary.
Yes, it is voluntary.
That's the problem, right?
So you're looking to have him...
If he's over 18, then there's a non-voluntary cost, right?
Right.
Federal or state. But if he's under 18, then it all has to be voluntary. Not voluntary by the parent, I understand. Voluntary for the child. Look, an addict of any age, especially a child with that much trauma, is not going to say, you know what, I'm 17, I think I should clean up. And that's a bit tongue-in-cheek, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that to you.
No.
But, you know, I get what you're saying, and I'm glad that there's another one. But that's all conditioned to the 18. So, as I say, you know, I've been hearing all the time, call the opioid crisis. I did. I'm sorry, he's not 18, I can't help him. So where can someone that's not 18 get mandated help without, not even without, I mean, they can't even go to the court, ask them to go down to, they can put them down to the correctional facility, say no, because he's 18, and go to the hospital, no, nobody's going to sit with him. So there's really no place I can go to. So he beat the crap out of my house. So, you know, and I'm not sure, I mean, all of a sudden it's gotten really dark, but I'm really, I came here just to listen and not say. So I figured you all have so much expertise in exactly what I need to find out.
So if I could, first of all, sir, I want to thank you for bringing up this particular age group, because you're not wrong. You are not wrong that this is an age group that, for lack of a better word, gets ignored, particularly if they don't have strong role models in their home and they're left sort of floundering, right? We can't force them to go to school. They're teenagers. We can't really force them to do anything, okay? But it also troubles me to hear in your voice the desperation that you want to help this youth and you feel like you can't. This is tricky because we can't get into the particular details of your case, but what I would say to you is that there are mechanisms through the family court that can help. Force him to do what you want him to do? No. But there are mechanisms that we can use through our judicial system that can help. And what I would suggest to you is to, first of all, continue to make your calls, particularly to DCF. Every single call you make, while you think that they may not be listening to you or following up on you, it's getting logged as an intake. Keep calling the state police if he trashes your house. Call if there's substance abuse in your home. Those are key facts that would allow us to force this youth into family court and to some accountability and maybe into some treatment.
I found a gun in a backpack that wasn't his. Not his backpack, not his gun, it was one of his friends. It was a gun. It's like these kids don't have any help because they're under 18.
I would ask you, sir, to continue to keep calling and report it, particularly if you've got things like firearms and drugs going on in your home. Please, I am asking you to please continue to call law enforcement when those things are going on in your home.
The St. JPD, they show up immediately, they handle the situation outstanding. I say, I believe you, and they say that's fine, because I couldn't speak better about the St. JPD. I truly could. They take a very volatile situation and de-escalate it. I've seen where this guy that I take care of is wild, and there's 2 or 3 officers in a room, and they get him to calm down. So the same, and the state police I haven't done, okay, but the St. JPD is doing a great job. What I'm asking is more for the state, you know, where can I appreciate what you're saying about the family court, I understand, but he has to be arrested already in the court system. I understand, in order to get us help. So it's a catch-22. I'm waiting for him to be 18, inevitably he will be arrested. He will go to jail. I hope he does not die before it. And I'm not being dramatic, I'm being quite serious. So I don't know if this is a question that maybe is raised for the first time, or has been overseen, or more likely doesn't have a question.
It's not a question that's gone unraised. It's an ongoing discussion with all of our community partners, because this is an age group that causes us concern, and unfortunately, we're going to have some new juvenile laws passed, delinquency laws passed coming up this summer, and the particular issues that you're talking about, they're all going to be in family court. And so, again, I just encourage you to not give up and just wash your hands of it until he's 18, because given his age, given where his brain development is at, the family court system is ready and willing to try to address those, so that he doesn't end up spending a life going down, getting stuck in the criminal system, the adult criminal system, and that being his way of life, which is not what we want to see.
No, I'm sure we've been to family court 29 times. We just moved to Vermont a couple years ago.
And another suggestion, too, that you can go to your representative and speak to them, too. The state.
So we were talking a little bit while you were discussing this up there, and we were thinking about what if we kind of got together and came over and had an intervention. We have recovery coaches here at the Kingdom Recovery Center. and educate, kind of, do you think that would get through or open to it?
No, not that would, that, listen, it's not like, if you've ever been an addict, it doesn't work that way. When you're actually an addict, it doesn't work that way.
Right, but always planting the seed and always trying. I mean, yeah.
Oh, I talk to him also, but, no, and he's not. That was become a violent situation.
Okay.
You know?
Okay, yeah.
It's the kids, man. These kids, I'm very glad you talked about meth. Okay? Meth is replacing heroin. I mean, all these meth dealers are now, heroin dealers are now turning into meth dealers in Southern New Hampshire. It's bad. It's really bad. So I'm glad that you
Just real quick, I want to, just to get to your point as precisely as I can, I hope I didn't suggest that drug treatment can be mandatory for anybody. So in federal court, if you're arrested and you're detained pending trial and you want to go to Valley Vista, you have to ask to go to Valley Vista. Yeah. And even and I don't think there's any mandatory drug treatment in state court either. They have to ask to avail themselves of those services. So the reality is people of all ages, nobody can be forced into drug treatment. They have to be a willing participant. And here's the thing. Having someone like you, and I don't exactly know who it is, but your influence in his life may be the reason for that moment. And I know it's probably not what you wanted to hear because it's not a magic wand, but just be there and keep doing what you're doing. And one day it could break in favor of him having that moment of recognition. You never know when it's going to hit. And look, if he is arrested at some point, I've met so many people where that moment doesn't mean he's going away forever. If it's a juvenile conviction, it's not going to be on his record forever. That moment of accountability where law enforcement intervenes and holds somebody accountable can be the moment, the first moment of their recovery. And I've seen it so many times. So it may not be the end of the world if it ends in an arrest, because it doesn't mean he's going to jail forever, or even for very long, to be honest with you, or at all. And, you know, like if he was arrested for possession of drugs and it was a misdemeanor offense as a juvenile, he's not going to jail, but it might be the moment where he realizes he's got to make a change, or else his whole future is going to close in on him. Me too. Me too, but keep doing what you're doing, because this person needs you more than anything.
All right. Yes.
Just for recovery, I'm big into intense counseling, and I believe it's really big. But I know Suboxone and Methadone are also a big treatment program. I'm just wondering how much of an influence has Suboxone and Methadone been in the combating this problem, and especially in this area, like,
Suboxone and even methadone and Vivitrol have been pretty big. I mean, most importantly, especially for someone who has a long-term opioid use, it's keeping people alive. I mean, deaths have been really reduced since Suboxone and to a certain extent methadone have been really taken on and utilized as a treatment program. I think one of the things, and you mentioned about intensive treatment, our view at Valley Vista is that we see medication assistance for treatment, not as the treatment protocol. And that, Suboxone or methadone aren't it in and of itself, that that's the piece that's keeping somebody alive. But as we've talked about here already, it's dealing with the underlying condition that's going to be really instrumental. So if it's an ACEs, an adverse childhood experience, or some other trauma-related thing, that unless that's dealt with, the likelihood of those other pieces going away is pretty slim, and the recidivism rate might continue. And the hope is that, some people need to be on Suboxone for the rest of their life. Personally, as a treatment provider, I had to recognize the value of harm reduction, but personally being in recovery myself and being abstinence-based, I was kind of cynical about it at first until I attended this plenary at a conference in New York. And it's been hugely valuable in getting people back into being productive members of society with all those other pieces as a part of it. So whether Suboxone or methadone, again, or Vivitrol, it has a huge impact on someone's recovery and ultimately long-term recovery and possibly even abstinence.
Anybody else? All right, do we have any other, yes? Will you raise your hand? Yeah.
Right now, I don't think we have a wait list. If we do, it's minimal, whether it's on the men's or the women's unit. So that shouldn't be a problem at all. As far as insurance goes, I mean, we do primarily work the Medicaid population. Right now, we're about 80% Medicaid, which is actually less than what it used to be because we have started to work with other, I mean, we've always worked with private insurance, but we've been working with some other states as well. But we do accept as an in-network provider, Blue Cross Blue Shield, for example, of Vermont, but nationally, the National Association, as well as a number of commercial providers as well. Unfortunately, and this is more just to manage expectations, the problem with, I shouldn't say the problem, but the challenge with commercial providers are, as many of us know, are deductibles. Oftentimes, they could be as high as $6,000, $5,000, and a lot of folks don't necessarily have that out-of-pocket expense or disposable cash, so to speak, but that doesn't prohibit somebody from getting in, and we could basically work out a payment plan or something along those lines, and of course, we work with private pay as well, but basically, and if it's a Vermont resident, they're entitled to treatment no matter what. That's the bottom line. So even if somebody doesn't have insurance, we get grant funds from ADAP so that during the time that they're applying to get Medicaid services, or Medicaid coverage rather, if they don't have coverage, say for like 3 or 4 days, we have funds from ADAP that will cover those days. Again, under the idea that every Vermonter is entitled to treatment.
Just to piggyback on that for a second, to hear that there's no wait list underscores the importance of us all working together. One reason why the federal surge concept came to be was to try to have an impetus for folks to get into treatment. A quick hit of resources to flood the zone and disrupt drug trafficking in an area to make people have that inflection moment. One of the people we encountered during this past surge commented that he'd driven around for 5 hours looking for dope and couldn't find it because it was just too hot in St. Johnsbury. 5 hours driving around, gave up, went home, started suffering withdrawal. For those who don't know, withdrawal is hell, literally. It is flu times 10. It is one of the worst experiences a human can suffer. And for someone to basically give up on finding dope, even for a day, is success. And that's how we're trying to measure success when we do these operations, and to hope that one of those people who can drive around and not find dope decides now's the time to go into treatment. That's the goal. So it's a supply reduction to allow that inflection moment for treatment to actually be a choice. Because otherwise, somebody's not going to voluntarily go through hell. They're just not. And to force that moment on them is the hope. And so without treatment providers who have the resources available, we're just not going to turn the corner. And I think that's one reason that we have is because we have wait lists that are so short. And thank you for all the services that you're providing as really strong partners.
Do we have another in the back? Any other questions or comments? Anybody else on the panel have any last words that you want to say? Yeah.
Yeah, just continue to report. That is so important. Information that you think we may have, we might not have, usually comes in from outside sources. So please continue to report. If you call our office, we can, it's public if somebody's on supervision or not. We may not be able to give you a lot of information, but we can certainly listen. And because we're listening, means that we can start that intervention process as quickly as possible. Don't assume that we know, because most of the time we don't, until somebody comes forward and says something. So that would be really appreciated. Thank you.
So the Recovery Center has some of our resources available in the back, talks about our programs and groups and things of that nature. But for those of you who may know people who are using, you may have prescription drugs in your own home. We do offer Narcan training at the Recovery Center free of charge. It's a quick 5-minute training. And sadly, as of lately, I've gone to daycares and trained their staff because parents are dropping off kids and they're afraid that parents is going to overdose in there. Wednesday this week, I'm training both the Arlington School and the Caledonia School, training all of their staff with Narcan just because. I've gone to Rural Edge and trained all of their staff. It's a good thing to have because you never ever know, and it could be a family member or it could be a complete stranger. But just trying to at least help people, because once you do Narcan them, if you get them to 911 and then they may go into the emergency room, that's where they'll have a contact with an emergency room recovery coach who can at least plant the seed of what options are out there and finding out if they want treatment and what type of treatment they may be interested in. So you never know, you really could save somebody's life and it could change them from, going out and using again. So that's all I had to say.
All right, thank you all for coming, and we're here if you have any questions, or you can give us a call, give me a call if you have anything. Thanks for coming out.